to Umbrex Presents. Thank you for joining today's event. I'm Shelley with Umbrex, and Umbrex Presents is a series of live interactive conversations with thought leaders. All of the sessions are free and open to the public. Today, we are talking with Wall Street Journal bestselling author Dorie Clark. Dorie is a professor at Duke University Fuqua School of Business, and she was named one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world. Dorie's books include The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World, and Stand Out, How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. Dorie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Shelley. Great to be here.
All right, before we get started and jump in, why don't we take a poll of the audience to see where you are in your journey of building content. So we have a Mentimeter poll. If you will just go on your phone or on a browser to menti.com, that's menti.com, and enter in the code that is shown on the screen. It's 7903-9281. So you go to menti.com and enter in that code, 7903-9281. So what we'd like to know is where you are in publishing content to build your brand. Do you publish regularly? How often do you publish? If you want to let us know. And what platforms do you publish on? Do you have a blog or a podcast? Do you publish through LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube? So if you'd like to give us your feedback and just we'll get a little bit of a sense of where people are publishing. I see some things coming in. People seem to be publishing somewhat regularly. Yeah, several times per week even. Daily, all right. So Dorie, it looks like people are publishing somewhat regularly on different kinds of schedules. And what about the platforms that people are publishing on? If you'd like to share with us, and we'll jump in with Dorie here in a minute and have a great conversation about this. Got some coming in now, yeah. LinkedIn, podcast, blog, articles, Twitter, a lot of that coming in. So yeah, it looks like we've got people really publishing some content on a regular basis. So Dorie, let's just jump right in. And what I want to start with is your book, Stand Out. In your book, you wrote, too many people believe that if they keep their heads down and work hard, they'll be lauded as experts on the merits of their work. But that's simply not true anymore. And you also wrote that being an expert is great, but it's not enough. To be recognized as a leader in your industry, a thought leader, you have to stand out. So can you elaborate on that and let us know how the people watching can stand out?
Yeah, absolutely, Shelley. Thanks. Well, I think we probably all understand intuitively that there is a pretty wide gulf between being good at what you do and being recognized as being good at what you do. I'm sure that, almost everybody here in the Umbrex community is, a really excellent practitioner. And, that's not in dispute. I think that what often is the case for many talented professionals is that the things that we have optimized for, the things that we have over-indexed on, have been things like the quality of the craft, or getting more educational credentials, or getting more experience. And those are fantastic things, but we know this is a really loud and noisy and crowded environment. And so ultimately, the tree falling in the forest doesn't do a lot of good. We need to make sure that the people who could benefit from us, that could benefit from our services and working with us, actually know who we are and are familiar enough with us to seek us out, because that ultimately is what enables us to command premium fees, to have just less of an uphill battle when it comes to landing clients. I mean, I think we've probably all been there, that it's a little demoralizing to feel like you have to keep, knock, 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 will you hire me? Or like, submitting to these chemistry calls or these RFPs or nonsense like that. You want someone to come to you as a sole source provider because they already know and believe that you have the ability to solve their problem. They already have a high degree of trust in you and your capabilities. And so becoming recognized for your expertise is what enables that to happen.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. So becoming recognized for your expertise, obviously that's the goal. And in the book, you also wrote that becoming such a recognized expert, as you wrote, is a mysterious and opaque process. So you also have a step-by-step approach for how professionals can build that recognition for their expertise. So can you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I have spent over a decade really trying to study this question because it was something that, and probably a lot of folks in the Umbrex community can relate to this. This was something that I really believed was mission critical for my own business. I started my consulting firm in 2006. I've now been doing this 16 years. And, early on, I didn't have a lot of connections. I didn't have a lot of sort of high powered networks that I could lean on in order to get me work originally. Unfortunately, I had done some cool stuff. I'd worked in politics and I worked in journalism and I'd worked in nonprofits, but that ain't going to pay the bills because those are not the people that can really hire you for the kind of lucrative consulting work that many of us are striving for. So I had to find a way to somehow break into the networks of people that didn't know me, that I didn't really have connections to. So I had to really try to analyze the process, understand what it took, and then enact it. And so for me, it was oftentimes a bit of a frustrating process. So I wanted to try to lay it out to hopefully make it easier for other people. And, they wouldn't have to feel like they were reinventing the wheel. So fundamentally, what I have discovered, I've written about this in the Harvard Business Review, is that there are three key components to becoming recognized for your expertise. And they kind of work together holistically. The three pieces, and I'm glad to go into more detail about any of them, but they are content creation, meaning you have to share your ideas publicly so people know what your ideas are. Number two is social proof. We need to give people at a glance enough confidence in who we are that that we know what we're doing, that we've done this for other people before, that they've heard of, that we have credentials in whatever form credentials might come in, that say, all right, you don't have to worry about this. This person is vetted. So it's content, it's social proof. And then finally, it is your network because you need to know the right people. You need them to know who you are. Those three interact as kind of a flywheel and are what enable us to become fully recognized for our expertise and therefore to be able to charge what we're worth.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So in those three key components, do they go in that order? Does it matter what order? Are you constantly working on all three of them at the same time? Maybe tell us a little bit more detail about those three components.
Yeah, that's a great question, Shelley. And, the truth is early on for somebody that's, relatively new building their brand as a consultant, it's kind of like, whatever, do something, something is better than nothing. So it kind of doesn't even matter where you start. It's fine. But what happens over time, and this is a problem that I see a lot of experienced consultants fall into, we're humans, right? So we tend to keep doing the thing we're already good at. We tend to keep doing the thing we already like. And so the problem emerges because sometimes, somebody can be really over-indexed and successful in certain areas. They could be like, well, I'm doing so much, to build my brand, to build my platform. It's not working. Well, almost always, if that's the case, if they feel like that, it's because, yes, they are working hard, but the problem is they're doubling down on the thing they're already good at, and they are not lifting up the element that they have previously neglected. And so I actually have a free resource that might be helpful to some of you guys. If you go to doryclark.com/toolkit, TOOLKIT, You can download it. It's a free recognized expert self-assessment. And it's a series of questions that gives you a graded score that helps you figure out where you are. And therefore, based on that, to figure out where you should be spending your time and which of these areas is most useful for you. But in general, the further along you get, we tend to have one area that perhaps is more of a weakness than others. And so eventually, the bad news is eventually you're going to have to correct that weakness. Early on, do whatever you like, but eventually you have to get decently good at all three.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, that talk about how we concentrate on what we are really good at and what we like, and we really build that up. And it sounds like it's a little bit of a balancing act between doing what you're really good at, what you're an expert at, and learning new things or building up other skills. So do you have any advice for how consultants and independent professionals can kind of figure out how to balance that, or when to go? And obviously your toolkit, that's a great resource right there.
Yeah, I mean, in general, of course, this is something that probably every consultant has spent a lot of time thinking about, which is, we know that the natural tendency, if left unchecked, is for us, to have this kind of, these waves in our business, these sort of non-productive waves where it's like, okay, I've got so much work. Oh my God, work. And you don't have time to do anything else. And then all of a sudden you finish the work and it's like, oh, well, now I have no work. And then you panic because it's like, well, I've got to get clients. And so it's the, these like terrible cycles of feast or famine that are not helpful for anybody. I think what most of us probably would like is to have a more stable, predictable flow of business. And so the way to do that is to make sure that your marketing allocation of your time never dips below a certain level. Now, if you're completely packed in your schedule and if you've been completely packed for a long time, then, maybe it's small. Maybe it's only 10% of your time is spent on marketing efforts. That's fine. But if you have had this kind of choppy business model where it's like so much work, then no work, and so much work, then no work, then that implies to me that you don't have the sort of processes ironed out enough that you can afford to go down to only 10% marketing. So I think that most people need to keep a steady drumbeat of time allocated for marketing. I would say probably 25 or 30% of your time is not a bad ratio as we're thinking about it, because you always have to be thinking about the winter. Winter is coming, and you gotta be doing the work now so that when your current projects are ending, you will have other new things coming to you and you won't have to stress out about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anyone who's an independent consultant or a freelance professional, can relate to that feast or famine type of thing. And that's great advice to keep on going with the marketing, even when you're really busy to some extent, so you don't experience that as much. So let's move on to another part of Standout, which talks about finding your breakthrough idea. How do people find that breakthrough idea? Any advice there?
Yeah, so this is actually part of the subtitle of Standout: Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. And I think this is something I wanted to be sure to address, because for a lot of people who are consultants, who are professional service providers, one of the hangups that I think a lot of us have sometimes is we feel like, oh gosh, I'm good at stuff, but I don't know what my breakthrough idea is. I don't necessarily even know what's different about me or what's unique about me. Like, yeah, I do good work, but there's a lot of people that do good work. And that is a supernatural feeling. And I think that one of the important things to keep in mind is that we sort of have to be gentle with ourselves in this process. When I started my consulting business, I would say it probably took me, in all honesty, maybe about 7 years to figure out what eventually turned into the thing that I became known for, right? That doesn't mean that we can't start striving for that earlier, but I don't think we should be beating ourselves up. Like any business, whether we're talking about a high-tech startup or your own consultancy, there is a period of time where you're finding product market fit and you're trying to understand, all right, well, what audiences want to work with me? Who seems to resonate with what I'm doing? What do they keep asking me for? What is the place where I am adding special value or something that people seem to really jibe with for whatever reason. And as you're figuring that out, you can continue to refine it. But that is not something that arises, super early on. You have to often feel your way into it. But some of the questions that we can begin to ask ourselves might be things like, where do I have a competitive advantage, for instance? And this often comes from your background, maybe your training, maybe your demographics or whatever. I mean, for instance, if you are a former lawyer, then I would say, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do this or you want to do it, but you would have a competitive advantage if you wanted to consult to lawyers. Or, the same might go if you are a woman who wants to be a coach for women's leadership or whatever it is. But, what is a thing that gives you extra credibility? And, that's at least one starting point. Another question to always ask yourself is, well, what's not been talked about? What's not being done? If you really, it's almost like writing a book proposal, right? You read all the competing works in the field and you say, okay, well, this is good, this is good, this is good, but what are the gaps? And you can begin to think about that and understand, these are the seeds of how to figure out what your unique methodology is or what your unique point of view is.
Yeah, that's great. Before we move forward, I just want to mention to the audience that you can ask questions of Dory on the Mentimeter, menti.com, menti.com, and enter in the code for us, which is 7903-9281. 7903-9281 at menti.com. And if you have any questions for Dory, pop those in, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end to get to some audience questions. So thanks for sharing that about the breakthrough idea. It's great to know that it's a process. It's not something that people have to feel this pressure about knowing what that is overnight or immediately. So once you've established your fundamental differences, your unique proposition and that breakthrough idea, how can independent professionals start to build a following around that idea?
Yeah. So when it comes to building a following, one of the points that I talk about in Stand Out is that essentially we should think of this as a staged process, right? Like a three-step process. And the first part comes at a minimum with sharing your idea, right? Nobody's even going to know what your ideas are unless you're sharing them. So you need to begin that process. And so it sounds like from the Mentimeter poll that many of you are already doing this, and this is an important step, right? You've got to be doing things like writing articles or giving speeches or just somehow finding a vehicle. It could be live streams or podcasts, but some vehicle to put your ideas out there so that people who don't know you personally can discover you and can discover your ideas. So that's one piece, but that's what I would say is an initial starting point. And that is a way of beginning to give people something that they can share, right? Because early on, your clients know you, your clients think they're great, but if they don't have something to pass on, all they can say is like, well, Shelly's great, you should work with her. It's like, okay, if I really trust the person telling me that, then I'll hire Shelly, but that doesn't travel that far. Whereas if Shelly writes an article, then this becomes a one-to-many kind of phenomenon. And so I can send it to my entire email list. I can forward it to, 15 friends, and it has this kind of virality. So the one-to-many is important. And then over time, it begins to take on a life of its own and become many-to-many, which is the final stage, which is, I might have sent out Shelly's article, but then, friends three generations down are forwarding it. And then it becomes viral because other people who have never even come close to meeting her in person are somehow now familiar with her ideas.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really excellent way to look at it. I love that. The many to many, one to many, and then many to many. That's a great process. So moving on to talk about one of your other books, the New York Times called you an expert at reinvention, self-reinvention, I guess. So in your book, Reinventing You, you talk about the new branding landscape and leveraging your points of difference, which I think is a little bit about what you've just been talking about, finding your unique, what makes you unique and what you offer that sets you apart. So how can consultants or independent professionals reinvent themselves with these ideas to help build that reputation as an expert in their field?
Yeah. So I think, in many cases, it doesn't, I mean, we're always reinventing ourselves for sure, but oftentimes it's not necessarily that we have developed a huge public persona and then we need to change it. That happens sometimes, and we can certainly go into more depth about that if that's the case. But I think for many people, not to stereotype, but oftentimes if you are becoming a consultant, often you have had a background somewhere else, working for somebody else. Maybe you've been a corporate executive, maybe you've worked in nonprofits or academia or something like that, but you have oftentimes been in-house before you started a consulting career. And so the truth is, there's less pressure for people to build a brand in-house. That doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. They should. They just don't realize it. Whereas when you are an independently employed consultant or an executive coach, you understand at a super visceral level that you eat what you kill. And it becomes really, really important for you to be thoughtful about putting your ideas out there, getting known. All of a sudden, this is a matter of extreme urgency because you don't have the safety net, or I would call it the putative safety net of being inside of a corporation. And so I think in some ways it's less a question of reinvention and it's more a question of just stepping up in general.
Right, of course, because when you are the independent consultant or coach or other independent professional, you are the brand. You don't have another brand to kind of fall back on or whatever. You are the brand. And so building that brand and establishing yourself as the expert is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why don't we check and see if we have any viewer questions? If we can pull up that Menti poll and see if there are any audience questions that have come in. Okay, so Catherine Valentine has a question. To establish yourself as an expert, everyone always thinks of a book. Dory, when is the right time to start thinking about writing a book? So yeah, great question. When you're establishing your expertise, writing a book is something great that a lot of people do or want to do. Thoughts on that, Dory?
Yeah. Well, Catherine, you're exactly right. And it's great to see Catherine here. She's a member of my Recognized Expert Community, which is an online course and community that I run, talking about many of these issues. So thank you for raising this. For me personally, I was right there. When I kind of started on this journey, I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write a book because, that was to Catherine's point, that was the thing that I thought that one needed to do to grow one's brand. Also, I just, I think probably this is true for a lot of us. I just freaking wanted to write a book. I thought it'd be cool. It was like a lifelong goal. So I really wanted to do it. And then I kind of got my hat handed to me because it was 2009 and I wrote 3 different book proposals trying to get somebody to be interested in something, and no one was interested in anything because I was not famous enough. And that was really the wake-up call. I just didn't have it right. I thought, I'll write a good book and then I will grow my reputation because of it. No, if you were, it's different with self-publishing, but if you are trying to work with a commercial publisher, you will not be allowed to write a book until you are sufficiently famous. That's just how it works. And so you have to figure out the problem of how to become sufficiently famous. This is not what I wanted to do. This was not what I signed up for. I was annoyed by this, but I was like, well, okay, fine. And so that was how I started blogging. And that was how I started the journey to attempting to learn how one can become a recognized expert. So to answer specifically your question, Catherine, I would say if you know that a commercial, that commercial publishing is not something you're interested in, or it's just not in the cards for you, and it may not be in the cards for you, for instance, if you work in a super niche market, if I am if I'm a consultant to the aluminum smelting industry, I assume that aluminum gets smelted. I'm kind of making that up. But if you are, for instance, odds are HarperCollins is really never going to publish a book about here's how to do aluminum smelting better. It's just too narrow for their audience. They want something that 100,000 people or 1 million people could buy theoretically, not, a tiny audience. So in that case, you can self-publish it, and you probably should self-publish it ASAP, because it's a handy thing. It's a handy business card to have, and you can give it to all of the aluminum smelters that you meet, and it's like, here's the definitive guide, and they will probably be impressed. However, if your goal is different, if you have a sort of broader target audience, and if you want to be reaching one day, the possibility of doing commercial publishing, let's say you're a leadership coach for Fortune 500 companies, you perhaps could, depending on your topic, get a commercial book deal. And in that case, I almost liken it to kind of playing chicken, which is that you should probably wait as long as you possibly can to get a book deal, because the longer you spend in the platform building process of writing the articles, doing the podcast, doing the live stream, getting your name widely known, the better off you'll be, because the publisher, they might even come to you at a certain point because they've heard of you and they're seeking you out. That would be amazing. But even if they don't do that, your name will be familiar to them once you come to them with a proposal, and your platform will look robust enough that they'll say, oh, well, she can sell tons of copies. And so you're likely to get a high advance, which means that, so they don't lose their high advance, they are going to put even more money into marketing it and trying to make it a success. So you have the deck stacked in your favor if you hold off longer in writing your book.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love hearing you talk about the platform, because earlier you said being famous, and, we're not talking Kim Kardashian famous. We're talking about being a thought leader and an expert in your field. And you're absolutely right. When it comes to nonfiction publishing, business publishing, publishers want to see that platform. And that's all what this talk and your process is about: building that platform, building your expertise. So thanks for sharing that. Let's take a look at some other questions. Okay, so in building that platform, publishing content is a big part of it. And one viewer asked, how often should we be publishing content? Is there a minimum frequency? So in the Menti poll at the beginning, we saw people kind of all over, from daily to quarterly to, I don't know, when I feel like it or when I can, every now and then. Do you have any advice on a minimum viable frequency?
Right. Well, I would say if you're only publishing something, say quarterly, you do run the definite risk that people kind of might forget who you are. I mean, if they already have a good understanding. I mean, if I were to read an article by, I don't know, I'm picking somebody sort of famous in the space, like a Daniel Pink, for instance. I already have a pretty firm grasp of who Daniel Pink is. So if I read an article by him 4 times a year, I'll probably be fine, But the problem is, if there's somebody that I really haven't heard of before, I'm probably not going to retain their name because I don't have an anchor for it. And so if I only see it 4 times a year, I'm probably not ever going to form that anchor. So I think you do need to have more frequency so that people stay with you, and you can build the snowball up enough so that eventually it can start rolling down the hill. So I would say, if you have been doing quarterly, try to do it monthly. If you've been doing it monthly, try to do it biweekly. I think it is rare that someone is at risk of publishing too frequently. I suspect that that's probably not going to be the case for most busy professionals like you. I mean, certainly, internet marketers sometimes send emails like multiple times a day, which apparently is effective, albeit extremely annoying for people. So I would say maybe don't do that. But if you're doing anything, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, I think that's in the reasonable range in terms of content creation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I love your advice of maybe trying to bump up your frequency a little bit. If you're doing something monthly, maybe bump that up and try to do it weekly. So that's great advice. So here we go with a question from Bradley Holbrook. Once you have some authority, what is the best way to link your authority building to leads coming into the funnel? Is there a good bridge instead of waiting for leads to come to you?
Yeah, this is a great question, Bradley, and you're exactly right. It is important to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how to attract leads to us and to capture those leads. I know for years, I was just not conscious of this. I really wasn't clued in. And so when I was writing regularly, very regularly for Forbes, for Harvard Business Review, on my bio that I would have for those places, it's like, oh, and you can follow her on Twitter. And I'd have like the link to my Twitter. Don't do that, people. Don't do that. It's like, who cares who follows you on Twitter? One thing that we have learned time and again is that a social connection, a social follow, is worth a heck of a lot less than an email subscription, an opt-in email subscription. Those are people who are proactively raising their hand and saying, yes, you can contact me regularly. So I think that's what we should be striving for, and trying to get people off of social. I mean, that doesn't mean they can't follow you on social, but the goal is to try to take those social follows and turn them into actual email, people signing up for your email list. So how do you do that? I've put a lot of time and thought into it. What I would say, a few low-hanging fruit things, I've written a number of articles about this, but I would say number one, make sure that when you are creating content, that you are meticulous about making sure that there is a link at the bottom with your driving people to your website, and especially to a lead magnet where there is like really only one choice on that page. If it drives to your website, that's great, but there's like 100 things people can do on your website. Oh, maybe I'll check out his contact page. Maybe I'll check out his about page, blah, blah, blah. No, what's good about a landing page is that you get one choice. And the one choice is, do you want to download my thing? And you can actually, if it's an interesting enough thing, you can get a pretty high opt-in rate. For instance, just to go meta on this, if you go to doryclark.com/toolkit, as we talked about earlier, that's a landing page. And so you have one choice. Do you want to get the recognized expert self-assessment or not? And that's a way to drive people to subscribing to the email list, which gives you the opportunity to stay in touch with those folks. So always making sure that the bio in articles leads there. If you're doing a podcast, almost always the host will say, well, gosh, how can people get in touch with you? And people often have these like weird answers, send me a message on LinkedIn. Well, I mean, that's okay. But even better, send them to your landing page. So don't miss those opportunities.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Let's see, what other question is a good question? What are your thoughts about involving potential clients in content creation? So in many industries, there's the user-generated content or the client-generated content, which can be really valuable. So one question is, involving potential clients in content creation, such as interviewing them for an article, a blog, or inviting them on a podcast. That seems to me an excellent way to build your expertise and to become known as an expert with other people in the field. What are your thoughts, Dory?
Yeah, this is a terrific suggestion, and something that I would definitely recommend. There's just two caveats to go with it. So one is an important phrase in the question was potential clients, because if you are writing for a mainstream news publication, odds are you can't write about your actual clients, because that will be considered journalistically inappropriate, because you're kind of publicizing these people who are giving you money. But if they're a potential client, if they're someone you're not doing business with now, but heck, you'd like to get to know them, then that's perfectly appropriate. Now, of course, if we're talking about things for your own blog or your own podcast, it doesn't matter. There's not such a thing as journalistic standards when you're running your own podcast. But if you were writing for like a Forbes or an HBR or something like that, you couldn't do it with your own clients. So that's just one proviso to keep in mind. The other thing that I would just caution against, and this is not an insurmountable problem, because the good of connecting with people really outweighs any negative. But the important thing to keep in mind is that if you are interviewing somebody for something, people are often really dense, and we need to understand they will think of you as a journalist. In their head, they'll be like, oh, well, he's a journalist. He interviews people. And it's like, no, I'm a consultant. But you have to make sure that they understand that. And so in the course of the interview, you need to make sure that you're dropping in these references to like, oh, well, I've seen with many of my clients, blah, 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 blah. Or when I've worked with clients like you, I've seen blah, 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 blah. But you have to consciously overcome the fact that in their head, you are the journalist who is asking them questions, and that is your sole role.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Great advice, because otherwise that's just that person that interviewed me about something, not this consultant and this expert that I might call on for something else. So that's really,
Totally.
really good advice. So Jesse has a question. Can you comment on the use of ghostwriters? What do you think about not writers, writers, ghostwriters?
Yeah. So ghostwriters are, I mean, the main thing about ghostwriters is it's hard to find a good ghostwriter. I do not use ghostwriters personally because, I got my start as a journalist, so I'm perfectly comfortable writing. I can do it pretty fast. So it's not, there's plenty of things in my life that I outsource, but that's not a thing that I feel the need to. But there's no shame, there's no problem in employing a ghostwriter, but it is hard to find somebody good. So I think that's the key thing. You will probably need to experiment a lot, whether it's finding people on Upwork or even better, getting recommendations from colleagues. Maybe it's a question of, you can get a little creative, right? Like reaching out to your local university writing program and seeing if somebody, is an MFA student or a professor or, a teaching assistant or something needs extra work, whatever it is. But there may be ways to find them. But you will have to have quite a bit of back and forth up front with that person to be able to capture your voice. So just if you are using a ghostwriter, make allowances that, number one, it's probably going to take more time than you want or hope to find the right person. And then number two, once you do, there will be a lot of refinement so that they can learn to speak like you.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great points. And there are other options besides just ghostwriters as well. Co-authoring, I think, is a really good way to, a lot of people, if they're wanting to write a book, they don't necessarily they're not writers themselves, but you can get a co-writer and you can also get a great editor. So you do the writing, you've got the expertise, you've got the thoughts to get out, and then a great editor can help you rather than a ghostwriter. I think that's another good way.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, recommendations for becoming a standout content producer. Your book Stand Out, that's what it's all about. So, how do you improve writing and podcasting skills to become that standout content producer?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of pieces to this. I mean, one certainly is is really just sheer practice and repetition, because you will find yourself getting better in ways that you don't even know, you don't even anticipate. I mean, for instance, I run a weekly live stream interview show with Newsweek where speaking of interviews, where I interview a lot of authors and different people, and I've noticed over the past year and a half of doing it, I think really just from the sheer exposure, that I'm kind of looser, I'm less nervous, I'm able to kind of have a better time at it because it doesn't seem so stressful. I've essentially desensitized myself to it, which has made me more perhaps conversational and probably more fun. So there's a lot of things that just the sheer practice will do. But above and beyond that, I think that when we think about how to get better at stuff, one thing which I think we often really fail to consider, and it's pretty basic, but I think it bears mentioning, is would you be interested in reading that article, or consuming whatever the piece of content is? We often create things because we maybe have a picture in our head of like, oh, well, this is how it's done, or oh, maybe clients would like this. But I think for all of us, if we read another article where the title is like 4 ways to be a better leader, it's like, kill me now. We've all read that article 1,000 times. That is the most boring thing. I would never want to read that article. But if you can come up with an article that you yourself would be like, yeah, I would totally read that, that sounds interesting, that's the bar that we should be striving for. Because presumably, if you are an educated consumer in the marketplace where you're reading articles in the style that you want to be writing, you are beginning to develop a personalized, internalized sense of what's new, what's cool, what's interesting. And if it's interesting for you, it probably will be interesting for other people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. I love the, for leadership. there's certain pieces of content that are out there in a million different ways. And it seems like that's also a good way that people can look at their own expertise. What are they really good at? What do they know that other people don't know in the same way that they can write about, that's, you know, very unique and their helpful perspective to other people. So yeah, there was a question there. So we've been talking a lot about writing content, promoting, getting it out there, even writing a book. So then after you've done that, there comes the promotion. So there was a question about tips on promoting your content once you've got it out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it is true that many times we kind of drop the ball just when we've gotten to the finish line, because we sometimes think, oh, well, the hard part was writing the article. And, maybe you send like one tweet about it and you feel like you're done. Well, no, you're not done. You're definitely not done with that. One theme that I talk about in Stand Out is that if you have taken the time to create something that really is a great piece of content, an article that you're genuinely proud of, you want to spend far more time trying to get it out than you might imagine. I think the question is, how can you do something once and make it count 10 times? So, I mean, just by way of example, if there's an article where you're like, yeah, this was really great, I would love as many people to see this as possible. Well, okay. We don't just like share it once on LinkedIn and call it a day. I mean, you can share it on LinkedIn when it comes out. But then the question is, all right, well, can you take a special pull quote that's particularly intriguing from it and share that with a link to the article, 2 days later? Could you do a video of yourself on Instagram, let's say, or Facebook, talking about the number one insight that you learned from writing that article? Could you take a picture of yourself and put it on Instagram? Oh, here's me, putting the finishing touches on my article about blah, 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 link in bio. But just thinking about, okay, for all of the different channels that you're on, what is the way that you could optimize this? Maybe you could do a live stream where you answer questions related to themes that are in the article. There's a lot of way to continue to get juice from it, far beyond what most people do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes hand in hand with repurposing content. Like you say, you have a written piece, maybe you do a video about that, even a short video. Maybe you even have a podcast about that topic. So utilizing it in different ways. So Nicholas has a great question. There's a lot of talk about if you're published in Forbes or HBR, but how does one get published there? That's the $1 million question right there.
That's right. And in fact, not to be too self-referential, but for less than $1 million, I actually literally have an entire course that I've created on this. It's called Writing for High-Profile Publications, and it's about 6 hours of material. So you can tell that there is a lot of nuance to it. But let me share with you, Nicholas, and others, some of the key highlights related to this. So I would say, probably the most important thing for many very good business publications, let's separate out, literally how to get in front of their eyeballs. But, the first part is like, how do you write an article that will be appealing to them? And so I think something that we often fail to do is we often fail to reverse engineer the process. We come up with an idea and we think it's clever. It's like, 4 lessons that that great leaders can learn from, Steve Martin or something like that, right? And it's like, okay, well, that would be fun. That would be a cool article to write. But I've had people come to me and say, oh, hey, Dory, I've written this cool article. Do you think HBR would like it? And the answer is no. HBR literally never runs an article like that. The lessons from sports or the lessons from actors or whatever. That's not their house style. And so you're going to get nowhere with that, even if it's the best written article possible. So it's really important to spend the time up front to reverse engineer and, not just read to sort of get the content, but to understand, okay, what are the types of pieces? What are the angles? What are they doing? What are they not doing? And how can I write an article that would sort of fit in with that? Who can I sort of impute is the intended audience of this. So for instance, if you were writing an article, again, you were trying to break into HBR, but you were, using examples about, blah, blah, blah. Well, this person's weight loss campaign, well, they're not interested in that. It has to be super business focused because they're writing for executives. So that, reverse engineering and starting with that is the first piece. I think another key element of it is just really understanding in depth what has already been done. This is another super low hanging fruit mistake. People sometimes they'll write an article, again, maybe it's a good article, but if something similar to it has already been done by that publication, it's no go. So you need to really research to see what's been done before that's related to it, and actually link to it in your article so that you can prove to the editor that you're familiar with what their publication has done, and then position your thing so that it is different. Those are two key pieces. Above and beyond that, when it comes to actually breaking in, many of the publications have guidelines on their website about how to submit, but you know what? The truth is, it's always easiest if you can break in with a warm lead. So, the other half of the battle is getting connections with people who already write for those publications, and reaching out to them. Hopefully you already know them. You've already built up a relationship. If you have, that's great, because you can call in your favor to ask them if they'd be willing to pass on your piece to their editor or see if they're interested in talking to you. If you don't have connections with anyone, then it becomes a longer process. And in my new book, The Long Game, I actually talk about a rule that I have, which is no asks for a year. You certainly don't want to send somebody you don't know a message and say, "Oh, hey, you write for, insert brand name publication. Could you introduce me?" The answer is no, because these are very highly prized connections that lots of people want. They're not going to do that for a stranger. It's a foolish use of political capital to do that because they don't know anything about you. But the question is, over time, how can you build up a genuine friendship and relationship with that other person, be helpful to them such that you build enough of a relationship that over time they will want to introduce you to those folks?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about giving before you get, before you ask. And really, this whole process of building up your being known as an expertise and publishing content and creating your platform, that all helps further that foundation to getting known and found for these types of articles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, in a lot of ways, the whole premise about becoming a recognized expert, being known in the marketplace, it's about tipping the balance of power, right? So often when we are starting out as a consultant, or if we have not, really built up a huge brand in the marketplace, the power is with the buyer. And that sucks, but it's the reality, right? Because they can say, well, we have this $100,000 contract. Who wants it? And then, lots of people apply, and they see a million proposals, and they can get all snooty and, well, this one. And it's just such a sucky position to be in, where you're being evaluated by folks oftentimes who, really don't even necessarily know how they're choosing or what they're doing. It's demoralizing. And so I think for all of us, one of the things that we should strive for, which not only enhances our bottom line, but just makes for a better quality of life over the long term, is to develop enough of a professional reputation, enough recognized expertise that you're not in that dog and pony show anymore. And people come to you and the balance of power shifts in your direction. They say, will you work with us? And that makes it an enormous difference.
Right. And that's one of the main reasons for building up such a reputation as an expert. That's the goal. That's where you want to get. So what about, where does doing research come into this? One person has asked if you have any tips on doing research to help figure out what your audience would want to read and what content pieces. Do you do any kind of research like that, or do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to do for sure. And sometimes it just happens naturally because people will just come to you asking questions, whether it's online and or just when you meet them in person, they have common questions that they'll answer or that they'll ask. And I think it's useful for us to make note of that. Sometimes we just shunt it aside as irrelevant information, but we need to notice and pay attention. Say, oh, I'm getting a lot of inquiries about X. Maybe this is a thing. That's useful. But absolutely, especially if you have an email list of folks that you can contact, but even, just on your LinkedIn or whatever, you could periodically post, hey, I'm going to be creating some content. I think it's useful to narrow it down a little bit sometimes, because if you just say, hey, what do you guys want to know about? I mean, people often don't know what to do with it because it's too broad. It's like, well, I want to know about badminton. Oh, well, I really need to know about a better tax service. It's like, so I think if we say, look, I'm going to be creating some content around, whatever, around leadership challenges for newly promoted managers, something like that, then it enables them to sort of focus in enough to say, oh yeah, well, when I was a new manager, what I really wished I had was X and Y and Z, and they can actually give you some useful ideas.
Yeah, that's great. Thinking about what you wish you had known. What is the content you wish you had to read? And I think also sometimes there's research that has already been done that people don't think of as research, which is, what are the questions that you get asked all the time?
Totally.
People are always getting asked the same kinds of general questions over and over. So that right there is sort of informal research to tell you, hey, people would be really interested in a content piece around that. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes we just have to listen. We have to listen to what the market wants, and not have our own prejudgments so loud that we're ignoring things. I mean, I know that, for instance, I for a long time thought of myself exclusively as a consultant, and people would ask me, do you do executive coaching? And I was just like, no, But what I needed to understand was, implicit behind the do you do executive coaching is, hey, Dory, we'd like to give you money. Do you want some money? And I was just like, no. And, after a while, it's like, come on, like they're asking for a reason. You could probably expand your self-concept a little bit. And so, over the years, I've made a lot of money doing executive coaching because I realized that the market was telling me something that I was not fully aware of, but that's what the market was requesting.
Yeah, that's great. Being flexible, and ability to pivot and, explore opportunities as they're obviously cropping up with a need. And it's a little bit of like maybe potato versus potato. Someone might be calling it an executive coach, and you might be doing a lot of the same thing as consulting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have another question from Rick Denton. I'm too mono-focused on LinkedIn as my place to share content and establish my brand. I think a lot of us can relate when you have a particular platform that you're really good at and you just kind of becomes your go-to. He has concerns about not owning the platform experience because it's on another platform, LinkedIn, and the risks associated with not being in control. Would you recommend expanding out of that as a specific platform, and, for example, email list and the newsletter? Would that be a good step for getting on his own platform versus the LinkedIn platform?
Yeah, Rick, I think you're right to identify this as a risk, because frankly, whenever we're too dependent on any one thing, I mean, it could be, if you're a consultant, if you have, one client, that ain't good, right? Because if all of a sudden a new person comes in, or, oh, we're just making some changes to the budget this year, well, you don't have a business anymore. So you need to diversify. And that's true whether it is literally your clients or it is the question of leads and how you get those clients. So it's true. I love LinkedIn. LinkedIn, for most consultants is one of the best, if not the best place to get clients. So I respect its reach and I respect what it can do, but I also am fully cognizant that this is a publicly traded company, under Microsoft, but it's, publicly traded. They have their own imperatives. They have their own things they need to do, like juicing revenue. And there are weird unilateral choices that they might make in the future. They might not, but they might make them, and it could be relatively devastating to our ability to reach people. I have something now like close to 250,000 followers on LinkedIn. It's like, I don't know, 244,000 or something like that. That is great. That's a great way to reach people. I understand it could be taken away tomorrow. Meanwhile, my personal email list is much smaller than that. It is, I did a little trim of it recently, to refresh it. So now I think it's about 55,000 right at the moment. And, that's great, but it's a, fifth the size basically of the LinkedIn following. but it's actually much more valuable because I control it. These people have really, raised their hands in a super proactive way to opt into the list, and you're able to build up a substantial relationship with them in their inbox rather than in a kind of noisy confines of social media where there's a million other things shouting at them. So yes, I would really try as much as you can to prioritize getting them onto your email list, and encouraging them with landing pages, with giveaways and things like that. At a minimum, encouraging them to get to follow you on other social channels if you're on those channels, just so you have some kind of a backup or a fail safe, just in case, God forbid, something happened with LinkedIn and you couldn't reach people that way anymore. You don't want to be cut off.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. So I think we have maybe time for one more question from the audience. Let's see. Do you have a list or advice on the 5 or 6 or 7 types of content pieces we should think about creating? If you could pick, a handful of the most important types of content pieces, do you have advice on what that should look like?
Oh boy. Well, when it comes to the type of content, I there's a lot of ways to interpret even the word type. So, it could be that they're thinking about like articles versus LinkedIn posts versus podcasts or whatever. Honestly, I am relatively agnostic about how you're doing it, but I think that what is important is, number one, are you reaching your audience in the place that they like to be reached? That at a really basic level, for many of us, that will mean something like LinkedIn. Although, as we have been talking about with Rick, we want to we as soon as we can, we want to get them off LinkedIn to have a relationship with us as well. But if your target audience isn't on Instagram, then don't bother on Instagram, right? Meet them where they're at is number one. But number two, I think in terms of what the content is, the main thing that I follow, again, for all of us, there's a lot of things we could write about, right? Like you can, get creative, all kinds of different things. But ultimately, if you want the straightest path between doing a thing and then getting business from the thing, what you should probably do is create content that is tightly correlated between what you want people to hire you for. Because the ideal scenario, which happens rarely in real life, although we want to strive for it as much as possible, is that someone reads your article or listens to your podcast or watches your video or whatever it is, and they say, "My God, that's exactly what I've been looking for. That is precisely what I want. I loved what she said. Let's hire her now." And the more you can do that, it's like throwing darts, right? If you kind of keep circling the bullseye and doing variations of things related to the services that you can provide, then it makes it more likely that eventually someone is, number one, going to realize, hey, that's what she does. And number two, say, well, that happens to be exactly what I need right now.
Yeah, there you go. You've identified it. Those are the 2 main goals. What do they need, and that you're the person to do it. So, Dory, so much great information. This has been fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we might not have gotten to all of the questions, but the video will be available later. So really appreciate you taking the time and joining us, Dory. Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we close?
Thank you, Shelley. It's been great to have a chat with you. I loved interacting with all the folks who were joining. I see it up on screen, so I guess I'll do one more shout out for the Recognized Expert Self-Evaluation Toolkit. It's at doryclark.com/toolkit. And you can download that and check it out. And also it's a vehicle for us staying in touch.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed in one of the audience comments that your course on getting published, Catherine Valentine, I believe, said that she took that course and was published in Fast Company 2 weeks later. So that's a great recommendation. So yeah, thank you so much, Dory. This has been great. Really have enjoyed it. And thank you everyone in the audience for attending. We hope that you'll join us for our next Umbrex Presents event. That is in May, and that is going to be with Tyler Cowen. He's a best-selling author and economist, and we're going to be talking about his new book, Talent: How to Identify Energizers, Creatives, and Winners Around the World. So that will be on May 20th. It's free and open to the public. You can scan the QR code there on the screen, and you can also go to umbrex.com and register for that. And we hope to see you all there in May. And Thank you again for joining us.